Marvelous. So, hello again, and absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Dario Nardi with us on brains, personality, and romance. Over to you, Dario.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me again and folks for coming. I had no idea when I opened up this can of worms, which started with a
Mhm.
simple one-page handout for people somewhat new to type or not, just to see E or I, S or N, T or F, J or P. What are some things to keep in mind when dating and starting relationships and so on? And then I started creating a deck for today, and I passed it to Elena, who is nodding even now. And Elena's like, I think this is a little bit too much. And I thought, if I do exactly 3 or 4 minutes very tightly, Sue Blair would be proud of me, and I could get all the way through it. Um, so I didn't listen to anyone's advice except my own dominant function, which said, actually, why don't you make a much larger slide deck and then simply touch on the points that you need to touch on in order to give a sense of what's here. So this is what we're going to see, and we have a whole hour. There are a few points that I feel are particularly relevant and interesting, and but it's such a big topic, actually. Relationships are really the meat on the bones. If type is the bones, then here is the meat, and of course, talking maybe focus a little bit more on romance, but don't we want romance throughout our relationships, not just at the beginning or something like that? So, there really is a lot to bring in then with the neuroscience and also with type. So, without further ado, let me share the slide deck here, and a little bit of thanks to ChatGPT for creating some of the images. And yeah, here we go. So you might notice in the picture right here, there are some familiar elements and some not so familiar elements. And one of the familiar elements for anybody who has basic type knowledge is going to see that 4-letter code and opposite types, ENFP and ISTJ, for example. And then if you know about type dynamics, then you will know about the different functions like extroverted sensing, introverted sensing, extroverted introverted intuiting, and so on. But Jung, in most of his life's work after psychological types, really drew a lot upon many, many different areas from yoga to astrology, or is it astrology to yoga? Um, and one of the big inspirations he had with relationships and the movement of energy was brought from Kundalini and Tantric yoga. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it was an inspiration that intersected with the brain imaging, and I think can really help clarify why is it that when we encounter some people of a certain type, their opposite type, we're absolutely so drawn to them. And then other people who otherwise on the checklist seem to be fairly similar, including, the same type. So for me, INTJ, it would be ESFP, or the ENFP here, it would be an ISTJ. What's going on? There are so many variables and factors. And students they've asked me all the time, who goes best together romantically? I mean, college students really want to know this when I was teaching. Young people still want to know this. I'd love to know this. Is there an answer? And it doesn't have to be just romantically, it can be for a variety of things, but this is what we want to focus on. And because, relationships can be a source of great comfort and joy, but they can also be a source of a lot of stress and despair, even worse, like abusive kinds of things. And unfortunately, you may know there's millions of people on the internet who are interested in Myers-Briggs or interested in Jung. And the internet offers a lot of sort of amateur answers, as if no research had ever been done before, as if Jung had never talked about this. And I discovered a chart that people sort of wave around sometimes. Here is the chart of type compatibilities. It's all based upon one dude and his particular pet theory that he has, that we should be with people who are mirroring our shadow functions. I don't know, that sounds like a lot of work and sort of unpleasant and didn't match my experience. And so we're just going to ignore all of that, and we're going to focus on what is the actual published MBTI instrument research say, along with the brain science, and then Jung. And what did he say? Um, and I do have some answers for it, but my broad answer, my first one is always any personality type can match well with any other type given the right conditions. Those could be internal conditions, those could be external, whatever those are. How I tend to reply, and this is just sort of, I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds here, and then we're going to do some spotlighting in different areas. Studies say, and I know this from teaching social science and reading through this, that satisfaction and respect. In other words, when putting together an assessment that's about relationships, like a counselors, they want to see, like, okay, how do we know, or researchers, like happiness turns out to be a bad word to use. Like it's not a good predictor of relationship. I want to say longevity, but we'll say success. That could also be a word. Satisfaction is very important because people can be satisfied even if they're not completely happy. Because most people, by the time they reach midlife, realize we're not going to be happy all the time. That's not just in human nature. That even relationships, they come and go, but are we satisfied? And another really good predictor is respect. Do you have respect for the person that you're in relationship with? And the points where people start to lose respect, that turns out to be a very good early warning indicator that the relationship needs some kind of help. So notice those aren't about type. This is just in general things to say. Money problems also a major derailer of relationships, unfortunately, like among the very biggest. So it might look like a type match made in heaven, complementary types of golden pairs, as they call them on the internet. Money problems can easily derail all of that. And then we're going to get a little bit in the weeds here to talk about emotions, self-knowing, self-managing, and then also with others, but just sort of the self-EQ side of it, that people have a various ways of behaving. They have issues, and that includes things like attachment issues, is a whole wide range of things. But just sort of, do we know ourselves? And type is an amazing tool for that. So who are the best matches? Like, how do we figure it out? And I say, well, like shared goals, values, interests. I don't think those are a surprise to anybody. Biochemical attraction can be a big surprise. And I don't mean how the person looks. I specifically mean things that have been dug up in the science and research, like immune markers. There's a very cute little study, and they've carried this on. There's even a dating service in San Francisco that uses this, where they brought in a bunch of women who were in relationships, either married or boyfriends. And they also brought in a bunch of dirty T-shirts from that were all identical looking. They gave the T-shirts to the women to give to their male partner, and they were dirty T-shirts that had been worn. And then they mix them all up in the room, so nobody knows which T-shirt belongs to whom except some little code on the inside. And they asked the women to go and find, like, who do you find attractive, and can you locate your partner among these? Many women, yes, they found their partner among those, and they did report which ones they liked more, liked less, from the smell of the T-shirt. And what they discovered, that the most strongest correlator indicator was actually the genes for immunity. In other words, we have all immune systems, and there's a variety. There's a typology in the immune system. Some people have one set of markers. We'll call them the A markers. Another set of people will have the B markers. Some people will have more of the C markers. And that people were actually attracted to their opposite immune markers. And many times it may be that, we don't, the funny thing is, movies and TVs and books, you don't smell the characters in the story. If it's a Victorian romance, it's probably for the best. We don't want to smell them anyway. But it turns out that smell is very big chemical attraction that's there. Whereas there's also cultural and family imprinting. So this is in the first few years, and just life in general. The media, I have to say, as an INTJ, I'm one of those types that likes to think, oh no, I'm above cultural influence, which is just nonsense. I'm exposed to these things like everyone else, either who we want to be like, or who we're attracted to, or what the ideal is. Those could be fashion models, singers, sports heroes, politicians. So sad, it often doesn't include scientists, but some of them are well known. There's even some therapists out there who are very well known as ideals, and those get held up. Anyone remember Dr. Ruth? Um, Role taking also is very important, especially when you have two people who are very close in type, who's going to play which roles. I don't just mean who takes out the trash. I just mean energetically, sort of who is doing what role. And I have a resource for this for those of you who want to just tap my shoulder email wise and get a copy of this resource. And then finally, we get to type and type dynamics. And one of the biggest things I say to people who know type and come, and they want to know, what is my best match? Going back to that question. And I'm like, most of the people who come on the internet are in their 20s or 30s. Maybe they have actually a lot of relationship experience. Maybe they have very little. But what they all have in common is that they haven't reached midlife yet, much less afterward. And so they're not really aware of how powerful an influence the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth functions can be. And a lot of the advice that's given is about finding your best pair or best polarity match if you're like 20 years old, maybe 30 years old. And it doesn't take into account what happens at midlife, where the picture like completely turns upside down. So that, I just remind people even very interested in type, I'm like, you can't just look at the first three functions. You really need to consider the fourth function, the inferior function, and how powerful it can come to the fore at midlife and beyond. Can, not necessarily will, but can. And then what I'm going to introduce today is something that I've introduced elsewhere, but this idea that goes back to Jung and many of his years of research beyond type, and his writings were about energy, whether that was called eros and logos, whether it was Ida and Pingala, which are like more like Sanskrit terms, yin and yang, energies that people have within them, and how I think we need to go beyond the eight functions, even in type dynamics, and ask ourselves, okay, as an INTJ, I have to admit, I used to be annoyed by extroverted sensing people, but also found them weirdly appealing at a distance. Now I actually find them very appealing, but it does matter whether the energy is more yin or yang kind of extroverted sensing and comes in sort of two different forms. And I think that's why it explains sometimes we can meet someone of a certain type, say an ENFP, and we're like, oh no, I love this ENFP. And then we meet another ENFP who seems to even look similar, a similar background, all of these things. And for some reason, we're just like, I am not attracted to this person at all. And there's an energetic level that's there that maybe we don't need to spend all of this time digging into, like, boy, what are your immune markers? Like, let's do a test. I don't think you need to do that. You'll know pretty quickly anyway. But being aware of what these energies are. And then there are practical type specific methods. I had a coaching session with someone yesterday morning, and relationships and creativity were the two main topics, and we focused on relationships. And I was able to give a lot of type specific advice for, yes, how could she reach more into her third and fourth function, and very practical, specific things that she can do in an interaction or in a relationship. So that's like the big picture sort of overview. And this is the quote short answer that I give people. And then we're going to just dwell a little spotlight on some of these other ones. And in passing, it's like going through a museum. I'm going to say, yes, we're getting to the Mona Lisa, but notice this really cute Rembrandt over here. And we're not really going to get into it and stop and contemplate it, but just like know it's there. And that's, there's lots of things to think about with relationships. We will have time for questions. I have really in comments. I've asked that I be reminded at the halfway point and then at 5 minutes before, just to make sure we get in everything we need to, including your parts of it. So one of the thing about brain insights, so I'm going to try and spend half the time on this, maybe a little less than half, and then the other half on type. is inner conflict. So we have three layers in our brain, to say it very broadly. You can really divide it into five or two or whatever it is, but really we have this basic inner conflict between the civilized part of ourselves, the prefrontal cortex, and in fact just the whole neocortex, the outer layer of the brain, which is so important in humans. It's all the learned stuff. Um, it supports reasoning and judgment and is aware of social norms and what's appropriate to timing and commitments and context and consequences. And it always asks in a situation, is this wise? Like, is this a respectful thing to do? Is this a socially acceptable thing to do? Or I have a plan for myself or a vision, like, does this fit into that? It's very aware sort of consciously of what we need to do. And then we have this other deeper part of us that we share with all other mammals. I sort of say, and sometimes it's called the monkey mind. I call it the cat dog mind, because most people have a cat or a dog as a pet. Most people don't have monkeys as pets. So, whatever you notice in your pet, all those mammalian responses that we share in common with them, that's our limbic system. And the limbic system is just like, I want this. And it's involved in emotion and arousal and reward, and it reacts really quickly and instinctively based upon physical features and scent and sort of like the flirting, mating kinds of behaviors that people either will do naturally or they figure out how to do. And it's largely set in early childhood, and it does include strong imprints from early childhood, the first 2 years of life or the first few years of life. And then unlike the neocortex, where we can do habit building, and we can sort of consciously say, this, I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to do that. The limbic system is not amenable to that. The limbic system you have, at least in our level of technology in our human world, is set. And the best that we can do is become aware of it and manage it. And it is very much an origin of all of the primal energy, coming back to that idea of energy, that stimulates our imagination, that stimulates our unconscious and the images that come from the unconscious that give us motivation to do things. And then many times, unfortunately, these are in conflict. Everybody remembers being a teenager and being really attracted to someone and being like, no, 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 this is just a first date. Like, you're supposed to behave yourself. You should be modest. You should be careful. You should be polite. Parents are watching. What will happen if? And so what we do is either we put a lid on the limbic system and we're just like, shut up and be quiet. And we try and control it. Or maybe it actually just pops out and we're like, oh my God, where did that come from? And usually it is coming along with some shadow function or inferior function material. We may try to permanently suppress it in some way so that it becomes more closed and robotic. We may try to integrate it. Like, wouldn't that be great to bring it in alignment? But when I say integrate it, remember the limbic system is not amenable to a negotiation. It's not going to say very happily, oh yes, I'm going to give up this part of myself. So anybody who's faced, for example, growing up in a period where it was not acceptable to be gay or lesbian, their limbic system says one thing. Society said another thing. They have reactions to like, how am I going to manage this? Am I going to hide it? Am I going to suppress it? Am I going to express it? Like, what will I do? But there's no negotiating with the limbic system, except in a sense of how to manage it. So it's good to become aware of it and to understand that always we're going to have these inner conflicts within us. And many of those inner conflicts are about relating with others, because that is the most basic element. We go back to that cat dog mind. Like, why are we creatures? Why do we exist? It's not to reach enlightenment. Maybe for humans it is, but our animal side of us, it's to survive and to reproduce in some way, socially, physically, whatever it is. So there is always going to be this conflict, and this is the source of energetic tension, the source of energy that drives the human experience. So I wanted to put a spotlight on this because it's so important in knowing about the brain. And now I want to tell you about a funny little experiment I did for many years, 5 years at UCLA. students in my brain lab went through a virtual dating scenario. It was on the computer, and they looked through a gallery of 24 images, 12 men and 12 women, of similarly aged people, like 18 to 30. And they had to select 3 to go out on a date with. The date is just like a lunch date, dinner date. It's not a big commitment. They don't need to say anything more than that. They're just willing. Who would you like to go out on a date with? And the literature says that the brain decides in under 1 second whether we like or dislike someone. In 200 to 300 milliseconds, your limbic system has already decided if this person is a match. Everything else is window dressing. Everything else is a story or a dance that we engage in. In fact, the limbic response can be so strong that it actually, the energy and activity pop up into the outer layer of the brain, the neocortex, and also just get it very active. I even make a joke with people sometimes that there's this sort of high energy state called gamma waves that are there when we're learning and we have insights, and is also there when we see someone we're really attracted to. So if you're really tired and bored, I'm not going to suggest watching porn, but like do something that like actually stimulates. I mean, it's terrible to say, right? But 95% of the internet traffic, I guess, is there. But is the kind of, that's how important it is. It's up there with learning and insights, is finding the person that we're attracted to. Students' verbal statements about who they selected did not necessarily match their brain's reactions. And I can see their brain's reactions on the screen as it's happening. And the neocortex gives the answers that feel rational rather than the limbic system's primal responses. And this is true throughout all of media and all different kinds of experiments that are done with brain imaging, like consumer selection of products, or like which TV shows or movies, trailers are people enjoying. It's the same thing. The good news is, yes, young male, and I say men here, but let's be clear, we're talking about young adult male and female students. They tended to select the less clad, fun-looking gals, regardless of ethnicity, by the way. But they also still had standards. Their brain, even their limbic system, still even had standards. That's nice to know that even our limbic system has standards. Women also selected men who were more clean-cut, friendly, professional-looking. I can tell you in this gallery of 24, like who are the top 3 statistically. But their brains also really liked the football player more often than not. And that wasn't necessarily the top 3, but I know it when I see it on the screen. Also a good little tidbit to know, if you're dating or you're putting a picture up or just something romantic, unless you're trying to play like I Spy, don't wear a hat or glasses. It turns out that those are big turnoffs because we can't see the person's face, and then the brain has the sense that you're shady, that there's something maybe not just mysterious, but dangerous. And the limbic system also responds to that. So I thought that was really fun to just go through that, and in a very specific way, like you're meeting people and like, how are you responding? And so often these days, we don't meet people in bars or at meetup groups or whatnot. We can. I understand, by the way, church is still a very good place to meet people. As long as you share values in common, that's a good place to go. Meetup groups apparently are a very good place to go. But in practice, a lot of times we encounter people visually only on the internet, and we see 1 or maybe 2 or 3 pictures of them. And then how do we respond to that? So that's part of our makeup of modern life. You know, there's nature and nurture, and the nurture culture part of it is always going to be there. So I just wanted to put a little spotlight on those 2 things. And then I'm going to mention, I'm not going to talk about her work because you can go and read her stuff. Dr. Helen Fisher's work on neurotransmitters. She has this lovely book, Anatomy of Love, A Natural History of Mating, Marriage, and Why We Stray. And this is very important to know, that infidelity is also built into the brain, unfortunately, as a strategy, or maybe fortunately. I mean, that's how our ancestors survived. I'm not going to get into it, but I want you to know that this is a resource that's out there if you want to read about brain chemistry and so on. We will still continue with a little bit of the slide, though, because where it leads into is this, which is the work that I've been doing, Helen Fisher's 4 types. align with these brain wiring variations for sort of neurovariants or subtypes of each type, which I have talked about before. They're just 4 broad categories. They're not really subtypes. They're not smaller boxes. They're just reflect development. But they also hook into the work of Dr. Fisher and Dr. Viktor Golenko in the Ukraine, who is a socionics type person. And what we see are these different styles in the way people have developed. Are they more confident and driven and often in leadership role? There are INFPs who are CEOs of corporations. They don't necessarily fit the sort of standard type description of an INFP who's going to be a natural counselor and therapist. And they do still have those talents, but they have a more dominant style to them. And Dr. Fisher talks about testosterone and vasopressin as hormones that and get involved with this, that those people tend to have relatively more of those hormones. And I see they have a particular brain pattern, this like front of the brain, really a lot of connections there. And then there are people who are more creative, who are more exploratory and sociable not because they like to socialize, but because meeting people is part of exploring. And they tend to be in more of a rebel role. And usually that means that then they're outside of the norms and standard norms and institutions. They're outside of the 9-to-5 work week. And they also have a particular brain pattern, the starburst pattern, where the whole brain gets involved. And that's very dopamine driven. So if you just think, for example, for a moment, with one function, extroverted sensing, and all of us, as Elena mentioned in her talk, we all have 8 functions within us. They may be like really poorly developed or poorly expressed, but they're there. What kind of extroverted sensing do you enjoy? It doesn't have to be your extroverted sensing, it's the people around you. You don't have to be a type drawn to that because of type theory. Is just like, yeah, when folks do extroverted sensing, do I like a more dominant extroverted sensing? Which is more of a mover and is aggressive. Donald Trump, that's a good example. But there's the creative version, which is like an adventurer and the one who loves to go on like zip lines and canoeing and go to different countries and just explore in the sensuality of the world. And then there's normalizing and harmonizing. And these are more conventional or specialized, more supporter role for the normalizing. And that extroverted sensing is more of a participant style. Hey, everybody, like, let's do a fun activity. Let's make this like training in our company, this accounting training, let's make it as fun as possible. And they're perfectly satisfied with, they don't have to be the person in charge. In fact, they don't want to be the person in charge because they want to enjoy life. They want to enjoy their family. They want to enjoy their community. They want to enjoy their free time. They want to, they're perfectly fine in working 9 to 5 because they want to have like some kind of support and structure there that is making life easy. And
Halfway
then
through, Dario. Halfway through.
perfect. Thank you. And so this is more associated with serotonin relative to other people. I know I have high dopamine and low serotonin. Low serotonin can also make people irritable, but dopamine likes to have fun. So what can be done? What it does mean is that I'm miserable in a 9 to 5 job. It also means I'm more animated and expressive than other INTJs because I'm not normalizing. The normalizing style is more the traditional in a box, that standard description of the type that you're going to see in a big company. And last but not least is harmonizing. And if you want an example of harmonizing, if you attended Elena's workshop, that's a great example of INTJ harmonizing and how that can look different from the others. More empathic and reflective and more of a relator role, like has taken their skills or their type skills and focusing them in on something that's one-on-one and is a little bit more relaxed and reflective, doesn't need to travel the whole world, but does want to have meaning in their lives. And for extroverted sensing, it's a very sensual style, like a dancer, for example, that really massage therapist, these kinds of things where they don't mind the repetition because everything is a variation on it, but they like being hands-on with their extroverted sensing. They like that one-on-one interaction. They are more naturally empathic, not because of the feeling function, but because their sensing is picking up the human cues and signals that are there. So there's these different energies that are there. And I'm very happy to say, by the way, a big reason to come to the British APT conference in Copenhagen, or even in years to come when it's in London, is that I lead a little workshop, a little break time where we do yoga exercises to experience these different sides of ourselves. Because we're not actually just one-sided. We can be, you can say I'm very harmonizing or very creative, but you have these other sides to you. And we can do those experientially. So that's something else I wanted to sort of highlight. And when you're talking about the brain and what is it, that, where does that connect with type in some way? That for any type, any of the 16 types, there are individuals who are a little bit more dominant developmentally, those who more have creative exploratory expression, or more normalizing or harmonizing, which can be a great way to have a word or label for the developmental side, the nature side of the person, or the nurture side, sorry, beyond type. And is capturing a lot of things that make sense when it comes to relationships. Because here are two people with brain wiring patterns. One of them is male, INTJ, another one is female, ENFP. Their brains are very different. You don't need to be able to read these diagrams to sort of have a sense. This couple is going to have a challenge getting along. Where do they connect? They both have, in the auditory regions of the brain for hearing and speaking, a lot of people have that. But in many other ways, wow, they're so very different. And I have looked at a lot of couples, not tons, like a couple dozen, and most of that was because of my students in the lab in the more recent years, just before COVID, wanting to know what do different couples look like. And generally speaking, the more similar the brains, the more long lasting it was probably going to be. There was a couple that came in, they were a new couple, they'd been together 3 weeks in ESTP that I had met on a men's retreat, and then his new girlfriend who was an ESFJ. And their brains were very, very, very different. And that relationship did not last but another 2 weeks. And God bless the ESFJ. She came in not really knowing this guy to do a brain imaging session. So I commend her, but I didn't think when looking at them, well, they're going to have a lot of difficulty connecting. And apparently they did. This is not the whole story, but it's a part of it. Also going to say there's an ongoing research. I'm not going to get into it, but there's ongoing research about brains getting in sync. And one of the, not mentioned in the slide, but something very important is it turns out when they give people different scenarios, like working together face to face next to each other, working on the same task, but in different rooms, or, so those are two. And the third option is working together on Zoom, that people's brains got in sync when working one-on-one together next to each other. They did not get in sync when working together on Zoom. So as much as we all love Zoom and use Zoom, and thank goodness we can connect across the world, it does not have the power to sync brainwaves in the same way that, that being in person does. And by the way, there's some really interesting footage of Joel and Antonia doing a variety of activities together. You heard them earlier in the day, where their brains do get in sync. And that's really great news. I don't know where that footage is, but it was a really fun evening on stage in front of a group. And just to see two people get in sync was a lot of fun. And all I have to say is the word balloon animals now, and Joel gets very nervous about that. Yeah. So then there are lots of other things to know about. Why do people like chocolate? Because it contains phenylethylamine, which is also released when people fall in love. There are other little things to know, like for every one negative utterance, they found out it needs 5, the brain needs 5 positive ones to balance that one negative utterance. So there are lots of little things that we can know about, learn about to incorporate into their lives. I'd say one of the hardest things is a breakup. Why is a breakup? Because we develop a neural loop in our brain that becomes very strong. We're with this person all the time, often in a very intimate way. And then all of a sudden, the prompt for that neural input, that person there physically, is no longer there. And when the person is no longer there, the loop in the brain tries to maintain itself and keep going with memories, with imagined conversations, with all of that. And then what do we do in order to break that neural loop, or to allow that neural loop to be like soften and allow in somebody new? Those are all coaching questions. We're not going to talk about that today, but there are very specific things that have been found to work well. There's also sociobiology, which is the sibling of neuroscience. And a reminder to us that Jung said that what type we have or develop is a response to three parameters that we need to deal with in life. And one of them is the fact that we're human. Like, we exist and we have a human nature. He's like, how do we deal with that? Another is, he said, our individual nature, but sort of what we're born with, like our talents. Like, you have a talent for singing or athletics or something like that, which can be totally type independent. And then the third one is our culture, and what does our culture demand of us? And how do we manage these conflicts and these needs? He said, we develop a type. And that type then is the solution, our strategy to manage what is 180,000 years of human evolution. And it's actually longer than that, but the part where we know people started wearing clothes was 180,000 years ago. So I think that says something. And just a reminder, it's like 50-50 in terms of nature and nurture. So I'm going to talk about personality type and some insights from there. And gosh, I know a lot of but a lot of people on the internet are unaware that there's a book called the MBTI Manual. And that the MBTI actually has lots and lots of research. In fact, it's the most researched instrument in the world for personality. Contrary to people say, oh, there's no research behind your pseudoscience. I'm like, wow, are you ignorant? The book is a little bit expensive, to say the least. Which is why it's a delight to have Milo, Milo, the online database offered by the Myers-Briggs Foundation, to go and look up abstracts at least, because probably a person's question, including about relationships, has been answered. In fact, the MBTI manual has a whole section on relationships, like which types tend to say they're more satisfied. What are the biggest conflicts that happen around type differences? For example, they found out that thinking feeling is the dimension we want to look at to understand conflict resolution. Whereas sensing intuiting, a difference or similarity preference there is a lot about communication, how we communicate, whether abstractly or concretely. And that judging perceiving it causes usually a lot of tension in everyday life. It's like, oh, you're so organized, which in some ways can be great. But then if you've ever traveled with somebody and one of them is very judging preference and the other one very perceiving preference, you'll discover the differences very quickly. Of course, there's more than the 4-letter code. I just want to mention that. And then there's another resource. And there is, first of all, Paul Teager. I don't know what Paul is doing now, but I do remember his wonderful talk at the APT San Francisco conference in 2011 on type, and that was Type in Politics, but his probably most popular book over the years has been Just Your Type, Create the Relationship You've Always Wanted Using the Secrets of Personality Type. And he matches all 16 types to each other. He and his wife together go through all of that. And Socionics offers intertype relations, which does very much the same thing, which has been decades in development, and that accounts for subtypes. And you can find a little bit of that on the internet, and you can also find it in Decode Your Personality, the subtypes part of it. But I would really suggest Victor Golenko's book is actually very good for that. And then finally, I can't forget David Kiersey and Marilyn Bates, Please Understand Me. The original book has wonderful parenting advice, how children are growing up, but also relationship and romance advice that's very type related and really feels very practical. Things that you need to know about SP types and SJ types and so on. So lots and lots of good resources out there about type already and relationships that we know. So what I did with this is this is where it all started, is this 4-letter code Just a quick guide to personality and dating. Like meaning like up to that point where you're going to get married kind of thing. And even afterward, it's good. If for just like my students starting out or people just starting out learning type, what are things to know generally about extroverts, introverts? What are some important differences to know with sensing and intuiting? Sensing types are really super practical about things like, we're from a different social class. I'm not sure that's going to work out because they're very aware of all the small things that are needed in order to get along. Is somebody actually making enough money in order to support, or both of us together to actually start a family? Like they're thinking about that. What about our hobbies? Like activities in common are very important. Of course, we do all of the functions. Every intuiting type, INTJ and ENFJ and so on, we all also do sensing, but we don't put as much weight on it. It's like we all use our offhand, our non-preferred hand, but we use our preferred hand more. Intuitors are more focused on the relationship's potential and the abstract patterns and interactions with personality. They view the person in a more conceptual way and imagining where the relationship can go, how each person can grow, and they give symbolic meanings to the interactions. Um, Very different. And the same thinking, feeling, judging, and perceiving. If you want this as a handout, I sent these a little bit late, but I believe they can be made. Is this true, Sarah? Available on the website afterward, or should I send them to folks individually?
They can be made available on the website afterwards, Dario.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think these are great for teenagers and 20 somethings in particular. If they're just sort of vaguely aware of type and they're not going to be type mavens, to just give them this handout. And even if they're not quite sure on their type or somebody they're interested in, it's be like, oh, wow, yes, people really are different. And to keep these in mind to stretch. There's also the function stack. And this is the way that now people on the internet really think a lot about it. Oh, which functions do they have in common? So ENTP and INFJ. You look at just the top four functions even, and you see that they have a polarity in common. Their polarity is thinking, feeling, because both types have that as second and third function. And it's the same kind of thinking and feeling, introverted thinking and extroverted feeling. It plays a little bit different roles for them, but that polarity is there and is present. And for people in their 20s and 30s, I think that these are, and even I would say age 15 or 16 onward, are beginning to emerge in the person's mind, the third function, and that polarity is there and it's important. So it makes sense that when younger ENTP and INFJ, all of the things being appropriate and fitting, can really get along super well. Still, the INFJ is going to be like, oh my God, but the ENTP, like, why aren't you noticing all of these important emotional and social things? The ENTP is going to be like, I don't know, can we do some practical problem solving around this? But at least they understand each other's questions and concerns, and energetically, there's a similarity. What happens, though, is coming into midlife and certainly afterwards, many people are working on their fourth function. They're become aware of it in a way that they can't ignore. And all of a sudden, ENTP and INFJ, yes, they're working on sensing, but we know there are two kinds of sensing, and they're moving in exact opposite directions. ENTP is suddenly like, I want to be anchored somewhere. I want a home with a white picket fence. I want to have a regular schedule. I want to feel security. And the INFJ is like, gosh, I remember this fun that I had when I went to Tahiti when I was 18. I want to just like explore Southeast Asia. And the ENTP is like, what are you talking about? I already did that. I already did that in my 20s. Like, I'm done with that. And the INFJ is like, no, I'm experiencing it in a different way. And they are, because there's a polarity there with their dominant function, their inferior trying to come together. And in this space, they're different and they're going in different directions. That doesn't mean they can't be a couple, but it does mean that they have very new things to negotiate and become aware of and to work on. And for the last couple of things I want to emphasize, because we're talking about type, and I have found frequently that whenever I bring up anima and animus, many, especially younger people in the type community, pre-midlife, their eyes sort of glaze over. They don't know what this means, or they just sort of frame it, they define it conceptually. And if you look it up, it's like our fourth function, John Beebe's work, Dr. John Beebe, carries our contrasexual archetype. Like, what does that mean, even? What Jung believed is that we're often unconsciously drawn to people who embody our own anima or animus, and that we project that onto the people we meet. So in romantic relationships, we're going to fall for somebody because they mirror or awaken in us or meet the needs of our inner psyche, a part of us that is largely unconscious, that we have yet to integrate. And that as we project onto that person, we idealize them. And then if rejected or it doesn't work out, then we can demonize them. And Jung said there is a need therapeutically, however we do it, to withdraw the projection, to see and work with the partner as they really are. And so there are these, and you can see the dude on the left, like, is he seeing the woman on the right, or is he seeing his projection of her? And the same for the woman on the right. Is she really seeing him? No, she's seeing a projection of him. And this is very important thing to know about. And we're like, okay, this is an interesting concept, but like, how do we work with this? Now, Jung had a method called active imagination, which Elena also gave us a little practice run with. I'm not going to post it as a handout, but I do have a 4-page handout on active imagination, which you can contact and ask me about, because Jung sort of described that the other person in love relationships reflects the psyche's quest for wholeness. And so whoever is going along the way in life that meets that quest for wholeness, is we're going to be triggered or activated positively or negatively. And that's going to bring out material, our inferior function. And we're going to have different reactions to it. We're going to judge it, devalue it, love it, but feel we're bad in it in ourselves, like idealize the person, whatever it is. And the red book, and afterwards the black book, capture Jung's experience using active imagination to get in touch with this side that all of us have, whether it's through dreams, through meditation, active imagination, trance states like shamanic drum journey, psychedelic states, where the contrasexual self appears symbolically and also as projections. So if you encounter someone and immediately you have a very strong negative reaction, and it's not because they've done something bad to you or you don't even know who they are, or it's a very positive reaction, how that's a projection, and then the projection is relating back to the anima or animus. And there are ways to and again, this is a coaching thing, so we're not going to talk about it, but there is this idea of creating a safe space for the anima or animus to appear. And that's what Jung did, is he for himself created a safe space through active imagination for his anima to appear to him. There's also this concept of sacrifice and how it's related to the word sacred, and that if you want to understand anima or animus, consider what is sacred, what is worthy of sacrifice about the relationship. And if you can answer that question, you will be getting more deeply in touch with what it is. And that could be a one-time sacrifice, like in sort of the New Testament. Jesus makes a one-time really big sacrifice. It could be many small regular sacrifices that you do in your relationship. It's called the Old Testament style. You bring in the sheep and you do the ritual with the sheep and you bleed it and all of that, and the fire, and that's a regular offering. Jung would say symbolically, we're making a sacrifice in order to become closer to the sacred. And again, we're giving up something like that really juicy, delicious, or useful goat is being sacrificed for what? So we're making a sacrifice. And it can also be all the random things that come up in life that we just have to make small sacrifices all the time. And what are those? So that's another way to think about how work, yes, active imagination and this and that, that's all inside of ourselves. But with respect to other people, what sacrifices are we making for them? Do we even bother to ask as a guest comes in, like, can I get you something to drink? That's the first step, is just being a good host is a great way to practice sacrifice. I think there's like one or, yeah. So if you want, this is the handout. I've done this many times with Personality Hacker at their conferences in the evening. Looking forward to doing that again. Some stereotype busting. I would love to say more about this. I think in the type community, it often describes feeling types, notably the FJ types, as the most interested and adept at relationships. And the MBTI data does suggest at one end of the spectrum, when you ask people how satisfied are you, ESFJs are the type most satisfied. There's a cute little table in the MBTI manual. ESFJs report statistically the most satisfied with their relationships. INTPs report they are the least satisfied with their relationships. Obviously, these are statistical. And in practice, I have met joyful and miserable people of all types in relationships. I've met IT types who are very happy they and their partner together. And then I've met FJ types who are miserable in their relationship and their partner too. And there are various hypotheses about why, but one of the, which we can use type to say, like feeling types have higher expectations or the greater sensitivity. I think though type as a conceptual framework breaks down in that intimate space, because we're going from the social space where type is a really good predictor of like who will be great talking to clients. And it enters a very intimate relational space where shadow material comes out. And then all of a sudden our skills as whatever type, ENTJ and ISFJ or whatnot, all of a sudden our skills break down and disappear, because we're starting to relate, like all the shadow material and anima, animus, and so on is coming out. And just to be aware of that our type strengths on paper don't predict what's going to happen when we get into an intimate relationship. There is a handout that you will have access to, which describes, based on the brain imaging, the 4 functions: sensing, intuiting, thinking, feeling, and how they each show up in 4 ways. E and I, but also a yin and yang version of each. And for example, I like extroverted sensing, I do, but I'm more attracted personally to the mover extroverted sensing, the more yang version of it. And I myself prefer the more yin version of it. I like to just chill. I don't need to jump out of an airplane. I'm not super aggressive. I mean, it takes a lot to get me to be aggressive. I'm not direct in tackling things, but I do really love fun, relaxing. I pay attention to motion. I'm good at getting in sync with people now, not when I was 15 or even 30 now. Appreciating beauty, art, like those things. It is how it shows up. So who am I going to be attracted to? Not any SP type with extroverted sensing. Specifically, I will be attracted to the person who is carrying that version of extroverted sensing that's a little bit imbalanced in me and that I feel I'm lacking. 5 minutes, yes? Yes, wonderful. So this is a handout that you can look at and you can go through and ask, where is my, like, how do I like to do sensing? How do you like to do sensing and thinking and feeling and intuiting? And I'm more likely, as you move then to the other side, you know, there's going to be a reaction that either, oh, yes, I love this kind of person, you know, who has, say, yeah, you know, I don't like the Jeff Bezos version of extroverted thinking. Success with ambitious goals, using resources, emphasis is on speed and profit, very business mindset. Yes, all the employees, were going to track them to see even how many minutes they take using the bathroom. No, not that version. Someone may say, like an INFP, I prefer the builder version, the clockwork tinkerer, who like does beautiful work in all of this detail following templates and is frugal and economical and timely and efficient, but not in a way that's like aggressive. It's a very yin version of extroverted thinking. So this is sort of a way you can look at and ask, where do you have your strong reactions, including who you're attracted to? And in it, this talks more and just reminds us, I've already said a number of these things that Jung talked about, anima, animus, that we look to our 4th inferior function. We ask, are we more yin or yang with it? And then the opposite is going to be probably what we're attracted to, or revile and then need to work with that in some way. There are some great books on the topic. more if you want to get into the more energy side of it, which Sarah has already kindly mentioned one of those. And then Jung himself, there's a whole book on his talks on Kundalini Yoga. I would normally end with this. It's a research study by a student, and I'm just going to summarize it. They did like a full quarter research study using temperament. They asked each person how many relationships, how long each lasted, how rewarding or satisfying were they, and found something interesting at the end because they gave two assessments, type assessments or temperament assessments to the person. And in theory, if you take two assessments, the assessment should yield the same result. But in practice, a number of people got different results. And one of the assessments was very atomistic, like the MBTI used A or B, A or B, A or B, but it's like A, B, C, D. Or it was just like whole type descriptions. And they found that the student found that the people who had longer, more rewarding relationships were more likely to get the same result on the two assessments, statistically significantly, suggesting that the most important thing is like consistent self-awareness. And that says a lot, and that's where it comes back to EQ. So summary and some resources for development. I just summarized the different things here. I believe these 5 variables are extremely important, and in this order. You can't have love without trust, respect, care, and openness. It's like the fingers on a hand, and love is the thumb, but you got to have trust, respect. Notice respect is on the middle finger, care, and then openness. And even when things are going wrong, as long as we're open, then we have the capacity to do something. We need to show caring and receive care. Do we have respect for the other person or not? Do we trust the other person? These are sort of essential little things. If I were going to do one talk to people who don't know type, I would just use this and talk about how important this is. And there's also this thing called love therapy, which you can ask me about, and 20 roles played by temperament and what is the energy balance. And Vicky Jo Varner was involved with this many years ago and has a really cute quiz that goes with it that she created. And if you go to Copenhagen, you can do brain imaging. If you want to see type in action in relationships through stories, there's teaching tales for the 16 personality types. And then these are the resources. And that concludes. Yay, thank you, everyone. And I guess if anyone wants to stay, I guess for a few minutes, they can. And I will be here to hear folks' thoughts. And I didn't mean it to be so long and crunchy, but the more I thought about type, brains, and romance, the bigger it became. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Dario. I will stop the recording now. As Dario